Perhaps Lil Jeff's people have finally gotten their retribution. There are rumors that Trap City Rob, the man suspected of being responsible for his death, was recently brutally hit while incarcerated. It wasn't just any scuffle, according to reports. This was cold and deliberately done.
They stood over him, man, 17 times to the chest.
He was allegedly coerced into admitting prior to the hit. I am aware of every detail. Let's put everything in perspective. Social media is ablaze with discussions on Trap City Rob being sent to prison. Some people are calling cap, while others argue that it makes too much sense. Since Lil Jeff's death, his people have made it apparent that this would not be resolved with t-shirts and candles alone. Immediately following the murder, his father commented on Facebook with the kind of sorrow and rage that only a bereaved father can display. He didn't hold back. Everyone was asked to keep out of the way as he cautioned the streets that this was not over. Those posts weren't just sentimental, let's face it, nor promises. The Bloodhound family was returning with a bang, as promised. However, his father wasn't the only one maintaining the pressure. Lil Jeff's first day and the Bloodhound set's top affiliate, Q50, had been acting very strategically ever since the shooting. For weeks, there was a rumor going around the community that Q50 wasn't merely grieving, but was packing up. They claimed he was prepared to act and cause Trap City to suffer the same defeat they had inflicted. It is the same type of heat that Lil Jeff had forewarned his adversaries about prior to his passing. It wasn't a random occurrence. It was a repaired
Public service announcement. On my dead grandmother's head, if I'm laying, I'm down, God could come pull me out this car right now. A never took a dollar from me.
Wasn't just a show. The message was ingrained in the Bloodhound culture: loyalty, revenge, and legacy. That code wasn't just a conversation for Q50. According to those close to him, losing Jeff toughened him rather than caused him to shatter. He just had one objective in mind after that: retaliation. Furthermore, the feud with Trap City wasn't new. It had been simmering for months thanks to late-night shootings, cryptic Instagram posts, and warnings that spread like smoke before fire. The possibility that Trap City Rob was imprisoned was therefore not shocking to those who were listening. The next episode in a terrible saga seemed inevitable, if nothing else. After Jeff's passing, Rob ironically gained the moniker Defensive Player of the Year. His acts were even hailed by some who claimed that they were self-defense during an ambush. The excitement on the streets, however, did not translate inside the prison. Since Rob's name was connected to Lil Jeff's murder, he was automatically tagged as a marked man. In prison, rep is less than loyalty. The cops swiftly took Rob up after the incident. Everyone initially believed he would face murder charges when the case made news. However, after analyzing the surveillance and gathering witness accounts, the DA dismissed the murder charges, claiming that it was either mutual combat or self-defense. The book was shut for the courts, but the streets, it is not easy for them to close books. Justice in a courtroom was not what the Bloodhounds were after. To them, matters had not yet been balanced, and they sought street justice. Despite the major charges being dropped, Rob was still not free. Even though he was already a convicted felon, the mere fact that he was carrying a weapon put him in serious danger. In a location where your past haunts you, that's what put him in a long-term prison. And as the person who murdered one of the most well-known Bloodhound faces, he was immediately targeted because of that. There are politics, subliminal threats, and unspoken allegiances in jail, in addition to bars and lockdowns. All it takes is one incorrect name on your documentation, and it's over. To truly comprehend how everything went south, we must revisit that sweltering, tumultuous early summer day. June 8, 2024. A seemingly ordinary day in the trenches was cut short as sirens screamed. Blood was spilled on the pavement, and a young rapper's dreams were dashed. Lil Jeff reportedly went on a quest to attempt to catch an opportunity slipping. However, rumors circulate quickly, and he reportedly pulled up on a mansion located far out in Trap City. Armed, he hoped to find an easy target while searching for smoke. He encountered someone, however, who was confined and prepared for battle. The following events were quick and violent. When Lil Jeff attempted to break into the residence, the man inside fired instead of freezing or running away, and not one time only. According to insiders, Jeff survived between 17 and 19 rounds. Having that much weaponry not only stops you, it completely destroys you. Minutes after the cops arrived, neighbors fled, and the scene was characterized as chaotic. However, it was too late by the time they took action. There was a rising star. On the Bloodhound crew missing, the streets suddenly had a new conflict to resolve.
They stood over, man, 17 times to the chest. The autopsy came out. 17 times. You see how little he was, like, to take 17 bullets? 19 bullets?
It was a shock to a young guy who had made a reputation for being the one to catch his adversaries off guard. Lil Jeff wasn't accustomed to being the target of a gunshot wound. But it ended just like that, on the same streets that made him famous for his drill skills. The blocks that had applauded his every action were suddenly silent as his blood smeared the sidewalk. As evidence of how violent and frantic those final moments were, police found around 45 shot casings at the scene. There was a full-on assault, which demonstrated that no one had come to play, rather than a brief run-up and shoot. When the crowd dispersed and the sirens ceased, Lil Jeff was no longer there. Another name etched into a roster of rappers who failed to make it out. Another face in the drill world silenced. But if you know anything about street fighting, you realize that a corpse dump just changes the chronology and doesn't terminate the war. After it resets the clock, everyone begins anticipating the next action or storyline. Rumors that are currently reverberating around the cells suggest that the next action may have already occurred. Let's go back in time for a moment and ask how this all began. The death of Lil Jeff wasn't sudden. Long before he died, this whole blood feud was heating up. The majority of hip-hop's iconic feuds did not begin with physical violence. It began with a tiny item: jewelry. However, in street culture, grabbing a chain is akin to declaring war, particularly in the drill scene. It involves removing someone's pride as much as taking their belongings. Lil Jeff did just that in the beginning of 2023. Instead of merely stealing Carter Var's chain, he made fun of him, treated him disrespectfully, and made it clear to the entire Trap City crew that they are not afraid. Such a gesture not only provokes, but also ignites. Without retaliating, Trap City was not going to sit back and accept that kind of defeat. The first significant response occurred on March 16, 2023, when Zoni, one of Drill City's most esteemed members, was apprehended and assassinated by Lil Cap from Trap City. The hit wasn't arbitrary. It had a personal element. Zoni was more than simply a member of the crew. To Lil Jeff, he was blood. And he felt something being broken by that loss. Jeff no longer moved like a typical street child after that. He became someone completely different, a man driven by retaliation, who was determined to leave a trail of bodies in his wake rather than merely try to compose music or assert influence. That was the real start of the conflict. It became the following chapter on June 25, 2023. His right-hand man, Q50, and Lil Jeff were retaliated against at that point. The Bloodhounds made it plain that they weren't going to sit back and let things go when they captured Law from Trap City and killed him. They had the same game in mind and were prepared to play it out to the conclusion. Once more, the tone changed with Law's passing. This was a comprehensive strategy, not merely retaliation. Additionally, Jeff had goals beyond winning fights. He was attempting to physically and mentally undermine his adversaries. In the summer of 2023, the bloodshed and humiliation continued unabated. By cornering Big Motion from Trap City, Jeff went one step farther. In addition to making the man utter Leo on camera, he rendered him unconscious and uploaded the footage for public consumption. It was psychological warfare rather than merely flexing. Is your adversary appearing weak on camera? It remains. Trap City noticed. They had a sense. Jeff, however, wasn't done. On August 31st, 2023, he and Q50 shot down Glenn from Trap City, dealing another blow. They reportedly shot him 15 times. It was more about making a statement than it was about ensuring his survival. Do not be afraid. Show no mercy. Trap City would have to retaliate for that. In the fall of 2023, they spotted Q50 slipping and fired more than 10 bullets at him. Q50 managed to survive even though that should have been a death sentence. The beef was only heightened by that near-death encounter. It served as a warning shot, letting Trap City know they still had strength left. And there was a clear message to the Bloodhounds. The cycle was maintained when they retaliated by firing T3 from Trap City. It was no longer even about specific hits at this time. It had devolved into an attrition fight. Who could endure more? Who would have tolerated more suffering? What began as a chain theft escalated into one of the most deadly street fights in modern history. Turf was not the issue here. Money had no bearing on it. It had a personal touch. It is impossible to turn back once blood is spilled and names are tied to it. It was pride. About allegiance. It's about retaliation that goes too far and leaves only names written in hashtags and rip murals. Both squads appeared determined to feed the fire until it engulfed everything, and it got hotter every time someone perished. This was a military legacy, not just beef. And based on the recent events with Trap City Rub behind bars, it appears that this legacy is far from over. Social media mocking and the popularity of diss tunes only served to stoke the flames. Both crews consistently treated their dead foes with contempt, viewing murder as a status symbol and death as a joke. Street fighting evolved into a digital spectacle and a sinister kind of entertainment where drill fans took sides as if it were a game. The more offensive and severe the content, the more attention it attracted. Violent content became a market due to views, likes, and reposts. No one was better at turning chaos in real life into online celebrity than Lil Jeff. He realized that authenticity was crucial in the drill world, and that nothing shouted real like burying your opponents. He turned his internet persona into a list of devastation. Instead of merely boasting about his victories in public, he posted about them, made songs out of them, and boosted his statistics as if it were all part of the game. His purported body count became more than just a rumor. It became a brand. Death served as a marketing ploy, not the ultimate goal. Additionally, Jeff was rising to the top of the street respect economy. All of this, however, had repercussions. The tension and paranoia that most people couldn't handle was brought on by the continual fear of dying and the strain of avoiding being hunted while hunting others. That approach, however, became instinctive for Jeff and his competitors. They welcomed it instead of merely adjusting to it. There was no film here. Living in survival mode, these were actual lives. An ambush could occur on any outing, stroll to the shop, or ride with a friend. Such mental stress ought to have caused them to break. These young guys, however, had been conditioned by trauma, brought up on retaliation, and fed the notion that aggression fosters respect and fear makes one weak. Additionally, the animosity between Bloodhound and Trap City simply intensified with each additional body. The horizon was endless. No peace negotiations, lest one side was totally destroyed or the police intervened with overwhelming force. There was no way out. In Chicago's drill culture, however, police officers are viewed as enemies rather than heroes. Cooperation with the law meant betrayal of the code, and the code was more profound than any court decree. Lil Jeff was extremely hazardous because of this. He was more than a character. He had accepted the disorder. Most people imagine serial killers to be systematic and eerie and leave traces behind when they think of them. However, the drill scene presents serial murders in a different light, and Jeff was the ideal example of that. He didn't require devious plans or twisted psychology. Anger, firearms, and a callous disdain for human life were all he needed. Zoni changed in some way after his death. Bodies were left in his path as a result of his transformation from a homeless boy to a man on a mission. Jeff was different from other gang members because he was a calculating individual. The violence was deliberate, targeted, and frequently recorded by Jeff himself. It wasn't sporadic. He was attempting more than just money stacking and turf defense. He was leaving behind a legacy of fear. In addition to respecting him, people were afraid to mention his name aloud. Jeff claimed to have committed 11 killings, although at least 7 were substantiated by police reports and street gossip. Publicly claiming responsibility for murders on social media and in music was not only irresponsible, he became the center of attention from the public and the police as a result. The June 25, 2023 shooting death of Lal, whose true name was Jao Goins, was one of Jeff's most well-known killings. However, Jeff didn't simply murder him. In his online persona, he made Lal into a prop by continuously making fun of him in lyrics and postings, preserving his reputation just to damage it. The practice of murdering and then clowning the dead became Jeff's signature. Trap City resident Glenn suffered a similar fate when Jeff shot him 15 times. Overkill like that was motivated by dominance rather than fear. Although firing so many rounds wasn't required, it made a point. Jeff didn't respect your life and wasn't scared to show it. However, on January 26, 2024, 2 young men, Robert Lil Rob Boston and Monteo Monty Williams, were slain in a shooting at Innovations High School, marking the most unsettling event in Jeff's downward spiral. What should have been a haven of education, safety, and second chances became a battlefield. What about Jeff? It is said that he claimed responsibility for it and exploited their deaths to gain influence. Beyond the line of no return, that was a complete sprint, not just a step too far. It demonstrated that his boundaries had vanished. He didn't think a school was off limits. The next question was how far the others would follow him if that was where he was willing to go. Following the school massacre, Jeff's posts on social media became even more sinister. He claimed to have 10 hats, with the final 2 being graduation caps, a troubling allusion to the 2 young pupils he's accused of killing. What some might perceive as twisted wordplay actually dehumanized his victims completely. It demonstrated how, to him, killing people had turned into a game in which the number of lives killed served as the score. He turned genuine suffering into jokes for his fans by making fun of death in his writings rather than merely celebrating it. More people engaged with his ludicrous captions, which fueled a vicious cycle of violence and approval. His murderous rampage continued. Jeff was implicated in the October 2023 murder of Donnie, a resident of Hattaway, Jarrow City, along with Lil Duce of Foster Park. It was evident from the double homicide that Jeff did not adhere to any street codes. In the past, killing a woman in gang warfare was a rare boundary that few would cross. However, Jeff saw only targets and no lines. It made no difference whether the person was a man or a woman, active in the streets or simply linked. You were at risk if you had any ties to his enemies. He was much more unpredictable now that he was a hunter with no restrictions. Another name was quickly added to the expanding list of casualties: Lil Pooh from Trap City. Jeff made his customary, carefully veiled remarks about the victim on social media, implying that he was involved in the murder and making fun of her. Violence was no longer the only factor in this. Domination was at stake, removing someone and then utilizing their passing to brag online. He gained not just notoriety for the bodies he dropped, but also for his subsequent bravado. He turned fear into fuel for his own legend, sadness into involvement, and death into substance. The posts were calculated as well as disrespectful. Jeff's apparent enjoyment of the psychological aspects of his actions only served to increase his danger. He didn't simply arrive and start shooting. He followed his targets, became familiar with their habits, and discovered where they slept, who they spent time with, and when they were most at risk. He then delivered a precise blow, guaranteeing people in their vicinity not just bodily pain, but also emotional destruction. This was calculated, not arbitrary. That was how someone who enjoyed the hunt just as much as the kill would behave. Even after his departure, he wanted his victims and their people to sense his presence and know it was him. Jeff was not only acting rashly, he was acting strategically. In order to ensure that everyone knew who was at fault, he knew how to hit the mark. His degree of planning set him apart from the typical gangbanger. His traits as a predator were enhanced by it. Instead of acting impulsively, he calculated every move. He would then make the results public. Instagram turned into his stage. Every post was a taunt. Every lyric was a confession wrapped in a flex. And every death was a trophy. Murder was the eventual outcome, but it was also the product he was. Marketing. People were also purchasing, observing, and responding. Interview.
Lil Jeff, he was on Instagram Live after he caught his last body, talking about, yo, it's 11 now, we up 11.
This was not merely illegal activity. Rather, it was illegal activity disguised as a brand. The primary content driving Jeff's ascent in the drill scene was death and destruction. These weren't incidental elements. Every shot became a part of a meticulously constructed image meant to garner respect and attention from a culture that prioritizes authenticity in real life above all else. Together with his music, his social media presence transformed violence into a narrative that fans could follow, respond to, and even exalt. For Jeff, the streets were a marketing opportunity as much as a place to live. His songs were confessions cloaked in bass and bluster, not just music. Not only did songs like AA allude to the violence, but they also praised it. Every line felt like a victory lap, a secret message to his audience and his adversaries that he was still winning, still active, and still out there. Although the beats were loud, the messages were more impactful. Jeff was the narrator, and for drill culture aficionados, it was like listening to a battle report. His words made it hard to distinguish between murder and music, making it hard to determine where the criminal started. A